I think I've got everyone else at this stage. Any declarations of interest from members? No declarations of interest. So item 3, the award of contracts for 3-school housing development. This is 2 parts in the papers. There's an above the line element of item 3 and below the line in item 5. If possible, I'd like to try and do the whole thing above the line, but if members obviously do need to deal with anything below the line, we'll save that and then make a resolution on that and move to that as necessary. So without any further ado, if I can move on to item 3, and if I could ask Graham Nelson to give us a quick outline of that, please. Over to you, Graham.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the agreeing that we could potentially do this piece of scrutiny in advance of Cabinet on Wednesday. I know that's raised 1 or 2 questions, but it's very useful for officers that you're able to pre-scrutinise in this case in this way, because what we're doing is we're trying to move this forward at some pace. As is clear from the report, there's been a number of hold-ups, and we're dealing with rapidly escalating costs in the construction sector that we're trying to manage. Officers have been working quite closely to take forward the 3-school development, and as the report reminds you, actually this has already been through Cabinet, and the principles about how this has been, how this development is to be approached have previously been agreed. What it's done is over the course of the rest of the last year, now is last year, clearly quite a bit of work has been done. Design standards have continued to evolve, and we've got more clarity on the costs. Now, the costs, for a mixture of reasons of both of the standards and the design and knowledge of the site, but also because of the general inflationary pressures, have continued to increase. We're keen to move that forward to be able to deliver and still benefit from the ability to roll forward the contractors via the contracting relationship that we have to ensure that that's a way of managing our costs. So we're keen to enter into the contract that's referred to in the papers relatively promptly following the Cabinet meeting on Wednesday. So in this instance, that process would be delayed if we received a request for call-in following the meeting. So my idea in suggesting that you don't do this exercise was to hopefully give members the assurance that they want to minimise the prospects of that actually happening, though, as I'm sure, I'll avoid the need for Leah to interject, that doesn't necessarily preclude it. It's just a way of managing that issue, so that call-in right still exists if members wish to exercise it, but it's a way of trying to be a bit more open about the information and give you a chance to have your questions answered. So that was why it's taking place. The report, I think, particularly the above the line aspect of it, is relatively self-explanatory about the reasons for why we've got into this situation, what we've been doing, and why the costs have risen in the way that they are. And I hope provides the assurance that the contracting route that we previously recommended via the Pagabo framework and the direct award to RG Carter Limited, we are of the opinion still remains the most appropriate one that demonstrates the best value for the council's money in the issue. And obviously the overall costs of the exercise have risen, and that's why, whilst they're still within the budget levels that have originally been set, they're out with of the delegation that was previously agreed by Cabinet, hence the need to go back for a further decision. So that's what I wanted to say by way of general introduction. I'm happy to take any questions, though if anybody wishes to delve into any of the more detail of the matters, we've also got Dave Shaw, the Council's Delivery Director, Housing Delivery Director, in on the call, who'd be more than happy and probably far better qualified than me to answer any of the details if people want to get into that level of detail. And apart from that, I'll shut up and give you a chance to ask any questions.
Thanks very much, Graham. So over to members to ask questions, specifically at this stage relating to the pages that are set on pages 7 to 19, so that we don't stray below the line. Councillor Driver, I think your hand was up first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. One on page 13, under 33 in the square boxes. This project will provide local employment opportunities for local suppliers and subcontractors, and will generate local spending for the benefit of the wider economy. Can somebody show me some proof where that's actually going to happen for that? I mean, is there any proof out there we are going to employ local people? And what do you call local? I don't call Peterborough local. So Norwich area. So could I have some information about how that will come about and benefits up and help for the local area? And on risk management, which is on page 14, you got under risk, the finance bit, you got a 1.27 million contingency hold. Can I ask where that's being held at the moment, and what criteria would be needed to jump in and use that? I mean, the prices are going up all over the place at the moment for materials and stuff. How desperate are we going to be to jump in and use this in the next couple of weeks, or are we talking about over 2 or 3 years for this?
Do you want me to, Chad, do you want to answer these questions one at a time, or do you want to take several and we'll deal with them en masse?
If we take those now, if you could, please, Graham.
Okay, I'll try. I may hand over to David to answer the first one in terms of the detail about how local employment opportunities will be generated here. But I do know that Carters, who are the contractors who will benefit from the contract, have various mechanisms in place that we previously agreed to build in local to favour effectively local contractors, and they're a regionally based firm effectively. So I couldn't give you a definition of local. It certainly won't be anything ring fenced to those who are resident within the city, but they've got certain apprenticeship programs, and they've got certain, there are a scale of contractors who will draw most of their supply chain from the local economy. So I think it's fairly self-evident that what's written in the report will be an impact of contracting through this particular route. Dave, do you want to, you probably know far more about it than I do. Is there anything you can add to that point?
Yes, just very briefly, the way we've approached the two-stage approach to understand the lump sum, which forms obviously the contract sum, is that as part of defining best value and looking for contractors that work regionally within our specification to RG Carter, they are to try with best endeavour to utilise contractors and subcontractors that are Norfolk based. We then have a secondary parameter that they can go out towards East Anglia incorporating that of Suffolk and out into Cambridgeshire. And then with respect to specialist components such as timber frame, we may go to a more national basis because of the requirements of that. But the primary aim, or when we assess the supply chain, is to look for contractors that are Norfolk based.
Yeah, Andrew, yeah, so I can bring you in.
Just on the track record of Carter's, certainly on the Goldsmith Street site, I think it was well over 90% of their suppliers and subcontractors came from a 40-mile radius of Norwich, with a significant proportion of those actually from Norwich itself.
And just to supplement that information from Andrew, that is the same process we'll be assessing when we actually do close out the contract negotiations.
And do you want to just follow up on the second point around the 1.3 or 1.27 million contingency, which is frankly, you need a level of contingency within the budget at this stage. As I say, we're dealing with a market where the costs of a lot of stuff is changing quite rapidly. One of the advantages of the way that in which we are proposing to contract this is effectively we are seeking to negotiate a JCT fixed contract price that effectively passes a considerable amount of the degree of risk around increased contractor costs onto the developer partner, which is one of the ways we've approached it to manage that degree of risk. So we have a degree of contingency within the budget that provides a degree of surety that we will be able to deliver within the budget that is being set. But we are relatively optimistic that we won't need to draw down on the full extent of that, what is a standard level of contingency at this point in the process, because of the specifics about how we've gone about, how we are proposing to go about contracting.
And in addition to that, I would only add that at this stage we have more robust employees requirements, which is in general terms is the specification of the build. So for our council homes, we are working to known standards that we built before. Of course, through various political debates, that could evolve in time. We very much doubt that on this particular development because we are building to such high environmental standards. But that contingency would allow a variation to contract if a key decision is sought to actually ask for that variation to contract. This moment in time, we don't believe there would be much variation to contract once we do contract at the fixed sum amount.
Okay, thank you for all of those answers. Does that cover what you were after, Councillor Driver? Excellent, thank you. Councillor Osborne, you were next, please, and then Councillor Galvin.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of questions. First of all, just a clarification. It says on page 12 that the social dwellings the number of social dwellings has reduced significantly from the originally proposed number of 83 to 52. But earlier on in the document, it says 83 properties in total. So I just wanted to clarify which one of those it is. That's just a quick question, sort of factual question.
Shall I take that one, Graham?
You could, I mean, I think it's set out in the paper. It's gone through a number of iterations. Yes. When it was originally set, a couple of, effectively the idea of developing this phase of land, it was originally assumed that the whole lot would be developed. Right, we then took various papers through to do the split between NRL to effectively do that, and that's changed the numbers to what is set out in paragraph 6 of the paper, and then those numbers have changed again slightly, but they've been driven not by, if you like, principles, but by the detail of the design process that's come forward. So there's been 2 iterations to the numbers.
So it was originally going to be all social housing? Yeah,
and that decision was made not to be all social housing some time ago.
Right, okay, then I won't go into that now, but the other question I had was a couple of questions. On page 9, it talks about the risk, and Keith also highlighted some elements of the risk. And my question is about how the risk is, who has oversight of the risk? Does that fall entirely to the shareholder panel? And my other question is about environmental standards. Obviously, you talk about a sort of fabric first approach, but I'm wondering if you've done a whole life cycle carbon assessment for the properties, and how that compares to other builds.
I'll hand over to Dave to answer the detail on the environmental question, but in terms of the risk, it's not the shareholder panel effectively. This is development. This contract that we're talking about is a contract between the council and Carter's. Effectively, this is HRA development. The NRL and the shareholder panel that considers the investment, this doesn't have the level of risk associated with it, because you don't need to effectively sell the properties at the end of the day. They are pre-sold because they're already designed to meet the standards of the HRA. We know the needs are there. We know the HRA is already funded to effectively buy them. So we are the end client in terms of the housing revenue account for the houses that are being built. So the risks very clearly lie with the council to manage that process.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that will then presumably go through normal processes of going through cabinet and scrutiny. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
To the first part of the question, Councillor Osborne, our aspiration as a developer is to understand full life cycle analysis, and we are aiming to move towards that in terms of maximising our sustainable credentials and understanding the full sustainable impact to any development we move forward with in the future. For 3 Score Phase 3, it is that still building upon and focusing on building performance of the dwelling. So we're not planning to do the full life cycle analysis at this time on this development. But as we move forward to such developments, i.e. Mile Cross, we do hope that we're in that position where we can take on that wider analysis of the development.
Yeah, I think it's worth doing from an environmental point of view, because a significant amount of the emissions can come from the development itself, from the building, and
the construction.
Yeah, it's crucial in this decade as well.
Agreed.
Thank you for that. Councillor Galvin, please.
Thank you very much. Just following on from that question, really, that the whole life cycle analysis and the fact it needs to be done now is obviously really important. And I wonder if we could formulate any kind of recommendation around that. But the question I wanted to ask was, because it's so important, these are leading the way for other places. I just saw it in another today, people mentioning the Norwich homes built on Norwich to passive house standards, the kind of leading light in the whole of Norfolk for other places, for things that aren't being done. We're seeing rashes of really not good quality, or rather not carbon good quality homes springing up around Norfolk, not linked to public transport, not being well built. So Norwich is really a beacon for this. So we've got quite a responsibility here to build out really well, I think, and to, as you say, that's the aim, and that's really good. In terms of that some are council homes and some are the open market, I just wanted to check that they're built to the same standards, both of them, so that when we're building council homes, we're building them exactly as well as the private homes, so that we don't get a situation going forward where we have council stock which doesn't have the same quality as the private homes.
May I take the answer to that one, Chair? In short, Councillor Galvin, yes, it's of the same standard. And yes, I totally agree with your comments. I do see Norwich as the leader towards developing high sustainable developments and high quality homes, and both NRL and that of the delivery team do not move away from that process.
Just before we move off, do you want the life cycle analysis point that was made? Is it Councillor Galvin raised the possibility of making a recommendation from the committee around that? As Dave has just explained, we haven't done the detailed work, but we hope to do that in relation to other cases. From an officer perspective here, in terms of any recommendation, the employer's requirements and the standards that are being built to here under this contract are given are actually very high, and as I think has been recognised, relative to all development that's going on across Norwich and across the wider Norfolk. We're building in an exemplary fashion here. What I'm keen to avoid is, for obvious reasons, any further delay in taking this forward, and so it's difficult to effectively, pardon the pun, retrofit the lifestyle, that detailed life cycle assessment of the environmental standards that you are building to at this point in the process. But as we further evolve it and get to grips with effectively a journey we are on to try and deliver proper net zero homes moving forward, that's part of the process that we need to adopt in relation to future developments. I don't know if that helps you.
Can I bring Councillor Galvin back in, please?
Yeah, just briefly, thank you. Yeah, I mean, you can't have too much retrofitting, I'd say, first of all. And secondly, in the same way as that you want to get this moved forward fast, you can't get retrofitting moved forward fast enough as well. So, you know, I appreciate that this paper's come to us early today to expedite this. You know, I'd like to see the same approach used towards retrofitting and whole life cycle analysis. So I wonder if there's any recommendation that could be made around the need for this having to be done so quickly, because obviously as an elected member, not knowing a lot about house building, frankly, and being asked to move this forward quite fast, it rings alarm bells in any contract situation when you're asked to do things quickly. I mean, it's classic that you're warned to sort of take your time, you know. Obviously this is no way anywhere near any kind of a scam, but you know, that's, and also working as an officer myself, I have had it drilled into me for years to follow procurement rules at all times, and I know procurement rules are being followed here within a framework. But I'm just wondering, is there anything helpful going forward that we could formulate as a general recommendation? There may not be, but to work within this rather difficult landscape of that you find yourself in, so that we don't have to do this so quickly in the future. Is there anything you've learned on the journey that could help in the future?
I mean, each case needs to be effectively dealt with on its own merits in relation to this. And what I would say about that is I can quite appreciate your perception, why it feels like this is being asked to make an important decision quite quickly, effectively. But when you look at it from another angle, what we've done is we've taken forward a recommendation about a particular route and a particular budget that was agreed in April. We've taken forward the detail of the design that's iterated for whatever, for both the environmental standards that haven't been compromised and indeed have arguably been enhanced, and that's had an impact in terms of cost. The entire reason for this report that it's needed for cabinet endorsement is because it exceeds the delegated limits that were set and the times that it was previously done. So it may feel like it's rushed to you in terms of your involvement this time around, but effectively this process that's just effectively been taken forward, a previous resolution that was made through cabinet in April, and has actually been an exacting, painstaking, thorough process that we've gone through, and is now coming back because at the end of that exacting, thorough contractual process, it transpires that we can't deliver within the terms of delegation we had when we originally set that up because of the pressures on budget that we've seen. So that's the response, just to give you some general level of comfort around actually that it is not that rushed job that, you know, make that decision in haste, repent at your leisure type of thing. This is a process that's been going on in a thorough, consistent and thought through way for effectively most of last year to lead us up to this point where the formal decision is required.
Thank you for that. Just so that members are aware who I've seen, I've got Councillors Carlo, Giles, Osborne and Vaughan Thomas with questions lined up. So Councillor Carlo, you're next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a few quick questions, please. On the fixed price contract, there's a mention of a possible risk premium. Is that covered by the contingency, or is there an additional cost, please? And then secondly, regarding the fixed price contract and rising costs of building materials, there's a danger of the contractor cutting corners. So I wondered whether the council has a strong quality control role, please. And then thirdly, to ask what the pool is available locally for small and medium-sized business construction firms, because with NRL, for example, we need to really be going out to a competitive tender, and if the pool is very small locally, then that's going to be an issue. And then fourthly, please, the homes, whether they include solar panels? There's quite a list of energy efficiency measures included, but no mention of solar panels. But the social housing companies, for example, Broadland, have been adding solar panels to their homes, and so there must be a sort of the cost of installing them must have presumably come down for that to happen. Thank you.
Graham, would you like me to take some of the answers to those questions? Yep.
Yeah, I think the fixed price contract and how you manage the contractors are fairly and squarely in your court. Yeah,
no problem. Clearly, I agree with some of those comments from Councillor Carlo. It's very volatile market at the moment. Again, the understanding of our approach to working with a direct award with this particular main contractor and the efficiency of us of doing that are laid out in the report. Therefore, one of the strengths of doing this was the resilient and robust supply chain that a main contractor such as RG Carter have in terms of being a large player in the region and indeed nationally. But obviously the importance, as I outlined earlier, is that the supply chain locally is considered for the work packages that are subcontracted by said main contractor. Of course, from a quality point of view, that's squarely definitely at my door. Everything that I've tried to do for this council, both the NRL and now the substantive role, is one of my key indicators, that of quality. It's nice to share with this committee that we now have a team being built around myself in terms of a delivery team. We have a contracts manager on board that is highly experienced at overseeing contracts and residential developments of the size that we're undertaking. So we will clearly manage, review, monitor all the quality matters to do with the construction phase to ensure that there is no cutting off corners by the main contractor or the sub-trades, and we will be putting hard procedures in place to do those inspections at a timely manner throughout that construction phase. So I can certainly guarantee that. As for the installation of PV panel, in terms of how we approach the current Norwich standard, but this is for a wider debate with senior officers and council colleagues, again, as we go along our journey of housing development. Currently, that is not within the employee's requirements, and indeed the reference of a Norwich standard, but we are developing homes that are highly performing. We are moving forward on this development to remove gas installation, to future-proof the asset and moving towards air source heat pumps. There is a provision for solar panels, but the instruction from client side to me in this instance is not to install the panels. It's not to say that in the future this won't be reviewed, but in terms of on-plot energy generation, that's not within the remit at this stage. But I repeat, that's not to say it won't be in the future.
Thank you.
Did that cover all the points?
Oh, well,
You're muted again, Councillor Carlo.
sorry, it gives me the wrong instruction. Yes, thank you very much, Dave, for that. Yes, on the solar panels, just to say that the City Council is the client here. And so you could specify solar panels if you wanted to. But obviously, but are you saying that you're not in this case for various reasons? Is it to do with cost? How much would the additional cost per home be, please?
Well, if I may just pull Andrew Turnbull into conversation on this point, who is my senior user at this stage. And Andrew, if you'd be so kind to answer the question of why there's no PV at this time from client perspective.
I think cost does come into it. We are taking a fabric first approach, which we think is absolutely the right approach. Having additional kit on the homes is an additional maintenance burden. As Dave explained, we are going down the route of air source heat pumps for the generation, moving away from gas. I think there comes an element where you can't do everything within the cost envelope that you have. They're already quite expensive homes, and to start adding in additional cost, it just causes that kind of payback period that we're looking for the homes even more strain. I think going forward, we do need to define what that Norwich standard around energy production is. And I think it'll be a mix and match approach. I think some schemes will have air source heat pumps, some will have solar PV. I think it'll very much depend upon the scheme. I think also the layout of the homes, they're not all in an east-west orientation that helps with putting south-facing PVs on. So again, that just becomes a little bit more awkward. And are you actually getting the benefits from the tenants, which at the end of the day is what we're looking for, is addressing fuel poverty. Are you getting the best bang for your buck by putting PV on this scheme or by going down air source heat pumps? And we felt air source heat pump was the better route.
Yeah. Just well, yeah. Thank you. Because I suppose I've
Denise, you're muted again.
Generating electricity for lighting and for running equipment and so on. I'm just thinking, in terms of the future, if you're going to be thinking about retrofitting council homes and maybe including PV, would it be better at this stage to include PV rather than looking perhaps later at retrofitting, or are you hoping maybe that industry costs will come down and there'll be some sort of provision for energy storage, for example?
I mean, energy storage is definitely something we need to look at for the future. We've seen certainly schools that we've seen that have battery storage that have worked quite well. I think, as I said, we can't do everything on every site, so we need to kind of pick and choose the best options kind of going forward. I think the solar, it's an interesting one because you do have to have that maintenance of the solar panels in there in order to make sure that they are continuing to perform as they should do. So we are perhaps then adding additional burden to tenants on having to put service charges and things like that in place to make sure that they run efficiently. So there's a balance to be had, I think, is where I'm coming from. And, solar PV is definitely something that we will look at. But to me, it's not the most efficient way of getting reduced fuel poverty for our residents. And in this case, air source heat pumps is the better way of doing that. We have obviously got emerging local plans that's looking at 20% generation. So we need to factor in future thinking around what we will use. But for me, air source heat pumps is definitely the better way to go on this site.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Giles is next, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. Yes, this decision sounds very sensible to me based on the inflationary pressures and the volatile supply chain issues. I was just going to ask Graham if there are previous examples of us using the Pagabo framework for procurement and how successful that's been, and if not, if there have been issues, what lessons can be learnt from that. Thanks.
To the best of my knowledge, this is the first time the council's used the Pagabo framework. There's a number of those public sector compliant frameworks that are out there, and when we originally decided to use that in the report in April, we set out some of the logic behind using this particular framework that was thought to be the best one. As I say, there's nothing that's happened in the intervening time that's led us to the conclusion that that decision was in any way the wrong one to take, and the Pagabo framework wasn't the right way to go here.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Osborne, you're next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just coming back to that question of the environmental standards. I appreciate what Andrew said about the solar panels, but it's not a case of either heat pumps or solar panels. We can have both. And as Denise said, the solar panels are for producing electricity rather than heat necessarily. So I don't think it's necessarily an either or, and other councils seem to be able to do that, to install solar panels on new builds, council homes. So I don't know that service agreement is necessarily a barrier to tenants being able to use that energy. And if we're trying to get to net zero by 2030, every ton, every kilogram of carbon that we don't emit now counts. So this is really urgent, and the council needs to be leading by example on that. Just pushing back slightly on the whole life carbon assessment. Graham, you said earlier that this has been a very thorough process and has gone through all of the stages. My question, to put it bluntly, is why did we not consider the whole life carbon assessment for this project, and it's only going to be considered for Mile Cross?
I'll try and answer that question in a slightly more general way. The standards that the council are building to here, as I think has been generally acknowledged, are genuinely exemplary. When we look at both the the standards that many of the RPs and the other councils that are building to. They may be putting PVs on roofs, but actually the totality of the sort of near passive house standards that we're building with the treble glazing, everything else, this is as good as, if not better than the vast majority of other RP or public sector house building that's going on either in the region or indeed nationally. The environmental standards we're building to is right up there. That does come at a cost. So further increasing things like putting the solar PVs on the roof of them is something that we're happy to consider, but does need to be weighed up against that cost benefit. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the more cost you load into this process, the fewer housing needs that you can meet, because there is a certain limit to the amount of development that you can afford to do. And particularly with the council being committed to retaining the social rent element of it, this doesn't necessarily lead to an increasing income, so it's increasing cost. Thus, it reduces the number that it's being done. So you've got to draw the line effectively somewhere. Moving forward, the life cycle and the cost analysis, we've got certain work going on to help us inform that, potentially around mile cross, but it's not an easy exercise to do. It adds costs, it adds potential delay, and it's simply a decision making sure about how we can move these forward to making the best use of the available resources we've had. As you may know from other things, what the council is doing at the moment is effectively building a housing delivery team within the council to give it much more capacity and expertise, to mean that we're less reliant on external contractors to provide some of the specialist expertise you need to do to development and get this into a form of routine. This is still a relatively early process that we're involved in. We are learning and refining it all the time, but I'd just caution members about thinking that this is something that you can always add on and always go to the absolute maximum. It does come at a cost, and we do need to think through those cost implications. And the final point of this, it does need to be integrated. The consideration of the environmental measures aren't just bolt-on extras. They do need to be considered at the outset of the design process for it. And so at this point, when we're on the verge of construction and you've designed the development in a particular way with the levels in mind and with densities in mind, and designed so it works with air source heat pumps, to retrofit, wrong word, to actually look at adding on solar panels at this point in the process would not be the efficient thing to do in the construction process. It needs to be done earlier on at the outset, which is how you evolve the Norwich standard and the employer's requirements as you move from one site to the other.
Follow up on that. Yeah, I fully agree with what you just said, Graham, about the need to build in the capacity to have renewable energy from the start. So I guess the question is, and I appreciate what you say about the cost. But presumably, I would hope that it would be possible in future to retrofit solar panels onto these houses, and we're not building houses that it's not going to be possible to put that form of energy onto. And about the whole life carbon assessment and the solar panel cost, I appreciate this, it may be commercially sensitive, but I'd be interested to see the figures on that. I'm not doubting what you're saying. I'd just be interested to see how much the cost is and what the sort of opportunity cost is. And a third question is about involving other partners such as community solar groups. I think other councils have done something similar where they've worked with local community solar groups who effectively provide the capital to put the solar panels on the roof, and have I think a power purchase agreement with the tenants, then either with the tenants or the council. I can't remember exactly, but I wonder if that's something that's being investigated.
I mean, in relation to this particular development, I think the answer's effectively no, that it's gone. But again, when you look for the future, effectively, this is this is a rapidly changing area. It depends how the government moves in terms of requirements. It depends how the costs move. One of the reasons the council has invested in the way established NRL, building to the standards that it's doing, is to effectively give it a sense of knowledge and, if you like, put it ahead of the market, so that when these costs are forced on you through the regulation that will follow in due course, you've thought it through. You've got some knowledge about it and you're working with it rather than just being forced to obtain minimum standards. So I think it's all the better of learning from the experience on one case and applying it to the next as you move forward. But as I say, it does come at a cost. I don't think there's any information we could share with you at the moment about the cost of applying it to these. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. Couldn't get anything about applying the cost in relation to solar panels in relation to this particular development, but certainly as we go into the design process for some of the other schemes we're working on, some of those options will be being looked at, and we can bring those sort of choices through to members for decisions about how you proceed in terms of evolution of the Norwich standard.
Yeah, I meant not necessarily for this particular development, but the sort of from the outset, how much would it cost to make sure that solar panels could be installed?
And in terms of that, once you do that, then that leads you into the final point of your question, which I think if you are going to design and build schemes that are designed to take efficiently solar PVs on them, you would also want to consider the route of how you designed them and delivered them, and whether they were collective schemes or individual schemes. It depends on whether the scheme is flatted or housing, etc., and whether there's any role for other third-party providers such as community groups to come in and provide some degree of expertise or finance to assist in delivery of those schemes.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Vaughan Thomas next, please.
Thank you for that, Chair. Perhaps I'm missing something here. All this conversation about retrofitting. This is a new build we're talking about here. I'm all for retrofitting existing properties. I think we're getting a bit off piste here. We're talking about this contract, and it's been informed by Passive House, and we've had the Goldsmith Street. It's an exemplar. I think we seem to be veering off. I'm all for Councillor Osborne's views on maximising energy efficiency, but we're here to look at this contract, and as far as this contract's concerned, and not unreasonably, I go with Councillor Carlo asking questions about people cutting costs. Of a personal experience of this many years ago of contractors in office petitioning wanting to source plasterboard cheaper when it's a proprietary brand, and they've got cheaper plasterboard, but at the end of the contract they couldn't produce the fire certificates because there's no guarantee. So it's about contract management, and I have faith in the contract management given what we've had from Goldsmith Street. But this contract, that's what we're looking at. Talking of future retrofitting a brand new construction, I find is a bit strange, quite frankly. It's just this contract we're looking at. But retrofitting existing properties, I'm all for it. It's not really a question, it's just a comment. Thank you.
Can I just reply to that to make clear what I was saying?
Yeah, please do.
The sort of line of my questioning was making sure that we don't have to then do the retrofitting in future. So building it in at this stage so that it's top quality for the future, so we don't have to then go back to it. That's where the retrofit sort of word came into it. But I take your point, Vaughan.
Thank you for that. Councillor Galvin, please.
Thank you. I wonder if we don't, obviously, I agree, yeah, we don't want to we had the answer on that one, but in a way the future is now, and it is an emergency now, and we need to get as much done now as we can. So when we can do things, I know there's a limit to funds, but there's also a limit to the amount of carbon we can emit, and we've already gone beyond it. So accepting it's not easy. I wonder if there's any way to have a recommendation that would be helpful to consider this kind of full life cycle analysis and the full aspects of what can be done on homes earlier in the process next time, if it would be appropriate to have a recommendation around that going forward, seeing as we have spent our time looking at this today. I accept it's probably too late for these properties now at this point, because the whole point of it coming to scrutiny was to try and get this off the board now, so we don't want to send it back to the drawing board. But this does seem a very important point for me to this council, which is aiming so hard to be an exemplary council in this field. So I ask if we can make that as some kind of helpful recommendation going forward. And as a corollary to that, do officers feel they have enough expertise to carry out, or enough support? I mean, I'm sure they've got enough expertise, but enough support to carry out that kind of analysis and change in those areas going forward.
Thank you for those points, Councillor Galvin. So we've got a suggestion of a recommendation there, which I think, Councillor Galvin, you acknowledge does deviate from the sort of the specifics of the contract award, but would potentially help the council moving forward. So, Graham, if perhaps I can get your input on how that might fit into the process, that would be quite helpful. Thank you.
Okay. In terms of how this affects this particular contract, I think, as Councillor Galvin's noted, it doesn't. But in terms of, I'm just thinking through, effectively, had we been having this scrutiny debate around the time of April, when the previous version of the contract report was originally taken, that would have been the time to consider the issue of the environmental standards. I mean, there was information in the report set out there, but we were some way, it didn't get raised in the same way as about the net zero aspect and the life cycle assessment. If we want to include that at future stages, well, that'll be a matter that the council effectively could do, but it would be relatively early in the process. We want to factor that into a recommendation that scrutiny advises the council that in terms of its housing commissioning activities and its housing delivery programme, in future stages you request that at an early stage in the process there's an explicit consideration of the life cycle analysis standards that it's going to be built to, and built that into our process. We could look at it, but as I say, I'm slightly reticent about sort of, scrutiny could recommend it. It's not directly related to the contract that you're considering, but I just word it in a way that doesn't increase the expense or the difficulty of us bringing forward development, because it is high standard development that we're bringing forward, and we are trying to move forward in a number of paces, a number of sites at pace. I don't know if that helps you by way of a response in shaping the recommendation.
I was trying to frantically type down the wording from your recommendation there, because I thought that was quite helpful as in terms of potentially taking forward for the future, but allowing obviously this particular item to move at pace. I don't know, Councillor Galvin, your particular views on Graham's wording there.
Yeah, thank you. Or Councillor Osborne, do you have I didn't note that down actually, but if we could come up with I do think that would cover it going forward.
I wonder if Graham could
do you want me to try and go
repeat exactly what you said?
I'll see if I can come up with it.
The one advantage of this being broadcast on YouTube is that we can go back, and if we were all happy with what we heard Graham say, that can form the basis for the recommendation.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up offline if that makes it easier, James.
If it helps, I'm just thinking about whether just to simplify it a bit, if the recommendation is for Cabinet to investigate whether it is feasible to include detailed carbon life cycle analysis in the design phases for future developments, whether that does something along the lines of it.
Just to throw a spanner in the works, I suppose the question there is that future developments with the council as client for the housing revenue account, or future developments where the council's client for NRL, or both of those?
Well, in the context of where you're coming from, it seems to be a recommendation where the council's client because you're building for the public sector. Clearly, there's different routes in relation to NRL, and shortly you're going to have a discussion around the NRL business plan. I suspect we may get a feeling of deja vu around that.
Yeah, just on that, I would say that, I mean, it's the same problem. It's the same carbon that's going into the air. So I think it would apply to both.
This is me being very sort of procedural and process driven, I guess, and wanting to make sure. But if I can get a sort of an indication from other members of the committee, if they're in essence happy with what they've heard presented from Graham as a recommendation that we can put forward, not to impact on this item as to be debated on Wednesday, but and decided on by Cabinet on Wednesday, but on the potential for this to be considered moving forward. If I can get sort of nods, if people are happy with that, I've got some thumbs up and some nods. So that's great. We'll move forward on that as the basis for the recommendation then. And if there are no other comments to be made on 3 score, we'll then, if we can look to resolve as per item 4 that we need to go below the line. If I can get an indication from members that they're happy that we can exclude the public so that we can move to the rest of the discussion. People indicate they're happy. Yeah, some nods there. So thank you to any members of the public who've been present, and we will now suspend the broadcast on YouTube. So thank you.